So thank you so much for joining us tonight for this fan elected director roundtable. Hopefully, if I've done it right and I've got the technology right, you will see all the fan elected directors that are on the roundtable pinned to your screen. So it means that we're the biggest faces on there. Basically, I wanted to set this up tonight along with this group because since January, we've had a fan elected director mini network, and we meet as a group every couple of months to talk about the position and some of the difficulties and some of the joys of the position. And we felt that it would be beneficial to sort of widen the knowledge and the education around this specific position at a football club. So between I think there's 10 of us now, we decided that we would put on this round table and we will welcome questions at the end, but the first bit of it will just be generally a conversation between the five of us, just to give people a little bit more information, things that they might not know or things to consider. Any questions during this, just throw them in the chat and I'll try and get to them as quickly as possible. We will be recording this session. Some people I know aren't able to attend, and we're keen to just listen into the conversation. So this will be on YouTube, on our YouTube channel after the event, probably because it's me editing the videos, probably a couple of weeks away. But any questions in the meantime, just throw them in the chat and we'll try and get to them as quickly as possible. So with no further ado, I'm just going to offer up introductions. So most of you know me, I'm Debs, I'm the EFL Network Manager. I am going to go to David first.
I'm David Matthews-Jones, I'm FED at Cambridge United. I'm also the SLO there. Been doing the role for 6 years. After the first 2 years, I've been elected every year by the members of the trust to remain as FED.
David Beasley.
Evening all, Dave Beasley, Robbins Trust and Cheltenham Town. I've been the FED on the Cheltenham Town board for around 3.5 years, elected twice in that period by the membership of the trust.
Thank you. Nick.
Hi, my name is Nick Hawker. I'm from Exeter City. I was elected as a trustee around 4 years ago, was elected as chair of the trust at the same time, and by default became an FED or a director of Exeter City.
Mark.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mark Bevan. I'm chairman of the Railway Men's Supporters Association and also the FED of Crewe Alexandra. I think it's probably worthwhile just mentioning that we had the opportunity to have an FED because our supporters raised enough money to purchase 10% of the share capital of the Crewe Alex Group, and I've been a director for just over 18 months now.
Lovely, thank you. And then further to that, we also have fan elected directors at Brentford, Grimsby, Wickham. So we've got a number of other fan elected directors that form part of this network. So we're going to just look at the nuts and bolts first, okay, guys? We're going to look at what the actual role is of a fan elected director. So I'm going to go to Nick first. What is the actual role that you do?
So I don't know how much we differ from other clubs. Of course, at Exeter City, we actually own the club outright. So there's we have 4 FEDs on the board, and we constructed our governance and our articles to ensure that the trust could never be outvoted by members of the club board. My role really is to keep order, I guess. There's always a push and pull between the ethos of a trust-owned club and the commerciality of the football club. So people want to, we always have a saying, it's all about the price of a pint of Thatcher's, where the football club want to charge as much as they can get away with. And we argue, well, actually, that's not necessary. We don't want to rip our supporters off. We don't want to be like we perceive many fan-owned clubs, not fan-owned, what many privately owned clubs are like, where it just becomes a money-making machine. So my role really is to strike that balance and to ensure that people buy into our ethos, whether they're from the trust or whether they're appointed externally. So it makes for very long and interesting club board meetings, but definitely worthwhile.
And then in terms of just building on that, Dave Beasley, have you got any other thoughts in terms of the role and what it kind of involves?
Slightly different, I suppose, at Cheltenham, because we, like Mark at Crewe Alexandra, we only own 10% of the club. We are there by virtue of the fact that fact, and we only hold one director on the board. I suppose my job is to represent the thinking of the fans when decisions are being made at a board level. And I suppose the point of that, just analogy that Nick uses, it's a little more difficult to get the point across that sometimes putting prices up isn't always the answer.
And then in terms of, just if we think about this, in terms of the actual name, fan elected director, where are we on that? Because actually you are full directors of clubs. So Mark, would you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I think, our situation is very similar to David's at Cheltenham in that we've just got the one FED on the board of 8. So I'm in a minority in any sort of conversations that go on. I was told right at the outset by our chairman that just to remember that as a director of the football club, that's what I must do. And I've obviously got the fiduciary duties of a director, and anything I do has got to be in the best interests of Crewe Alexandra. To which point I keep pointing out to them that that's exactly what I would do as a supporter of Crewe Alexandra anyway. So the two go hand in hand. But there is always a crossover between supporters' views and directors' views, generally financially led. So I feel as though I'm there as that link between the two and just trying to get both parties to see both sides of the argument.
And then in terms of kind of some of the job lists that you might come up against, Dave, Matthew Jones, what sort of things are you doing weekly, monthly?
At the moment, we're doing a lot of work in diversity. I'm doing that on behalf of the board. I'm working with the trust on that. We're trying to make the club more inclusive at the moment, so I'm doing that. As the SLO, there's a crossover really, also trying to improve the facilities and trying to get the board to agree to improve facilities, and also the trust board. Although you're a representative of the trust board, I also feel that you're also the representative of all supporters. And, as everybody else is saying, I will argue for everything I can on behalf of the supporters, but at the end of the day, I have the fiduciary duties and the legal duties of a director, so I have to follow them. And we're fortunate, in some ways we're fortunate that we have a director, and it's now because we have it even though we don't have any shares within the club. So that we had to sell our shares a few years ago, but we've kept the FED role because the club, the owners and everybody values that role.
And in terms of how you get to be a fan elected director, so would any of you want to just explain, let's go with Dave Beasley first, explain the sort of process that happens within your trust and your club for this position?
We have a clear set of rules that you either have to have been a trust member for a year, or you have to have been selected by the trust board to stand for election. And you must have 2 nominees. And at that point, it is put, if there's more than one applicant, it is put up to election at our annual general meeting every other October. It's a 2-year cycle. I haven't stood against anyone so far, and I'd welcome it, to be honest. I'm a fan of democracy. And then once the election is ratified by the trust membership, it then has to be ratified by the club board.
And then Mark, what's the situation with you guys?
Yeah, similar to David's, probably because we had the FSA involved in our model rules when we were going through the process, but slightly different in that our board member is only elected by our committee on the RSS board, so you've got to be on the board first. We have a similar sort of timescale, got to be on the board for at least 1 year. Our membership at the moment is only made up of people who contributed to the shares that we purchased the football club with. So at the moment, our board can only be elected by those members. So we're just about to open it up to a wider variety of supporters. Every member gets one vote, no matter how much money they contributed to purchase the shares. And again, similar to David, nobody has actually put their hand up to do the role yet. So whether I'm elected again, we'll see. But in terms of the Crewe Alex position and whether what chance I've got of being kicked off the board or whether anyone doesn't want it, obviously it's the same as for all the directors on Crewe Alex. We could collectively do something about remove any of the directors. So my position is no different than anyone else. But obviously that is a concern that I think as an association, as a supporters association, that it may limit who might be able to replace me. So I think that is a concern for both the football club and for my own organisation, the Supporters Association, because we've got to have someone who's actually willing to do it, is suitable to do it, but also has got some sort of skills to be able to fulfil that role. So I see that as being a big challenge for myself, and I'm sure probably Dave Beasley's had the same sort of issues, that we need more people to try and put themselves forward to fill our boots.
So just picking up on that then, in terms of skills and knowledge that you might need, because there's quite a variety of different skills that you can have or do have. And we know that based on our group of fan elected directors. But Nick, what sort of skills and knowledge? So if there's somebody on this call now that's thinking, do you know what, I'd be quite interested in this. We don't currently have the position at the minute, but, you know, want to see if there's opportunities. What sort of skills do you think would be handy to have?
I think it goes without saying, volumes of patience, because it's not, as I think somebody's already alluded to, the relationship between the supporters and the board, where you have the board who know every last minute detail of a situation, and the supporters who are reading social media all day and fill in the blanks themselves, becomes a real challenge. And of course, often you are trying to, as a director, you're trying to protect people. You're trying to ensure that no harm is done to the club, no harm is done to individuals who I guess a typical example is a young player being transferred either in or out of the club. You're trying to protect that individual as best you can from some of the nonsense that gets written on social media. So being able to manage, have the patience, and I think that's a core skill, to be honest, to have the patience to manage that relationship between the board and the supporters is it's really difficult. And you also need to be able to, I'm a great fan of listening. You have to be able to listen really carefully to what's being said, and I think it's underrated. Everybody has an opinion that they want to voice, but sometimes you have to accept that maybe you don't know. You know how you'd like your club to be run, but then there's some real practicalities around the way it has to be run, and that takes a little bit of getting used to. So you have to listen really carefully to people who you have a lot of confidence in and have faith in, and just temper your own words in order to help that relationship grow, and between the supporters and the club, to help that relationship grow into a place where we all trust one another.
There's a number of interesting points there. And Dave Matthew-Jones, do you would you like to add anything to that in terms of skill set? I mean, the patience one is a particularly interesting one, which we'll come back to later on in this call.
I think confidentiality, you've got to be able to trust the club has to be able to trust you, and the trust board has to be able to trust you to put their views to the club. I think you have to be trustworthy, and I think, like Nick says, it's about being a diplomat almost all the time. You've got to be diplomatic. You've got to listen to everybody. You may not agree with what they're saying, but you have to represent them. So you do have to represent their views, and you have to try and improve their relationship with the club, and the club's relationship with the supporters. It's like building bricks and steps, and it's so easy to lose that trust at any time. So I think it's trustworthy confidentiality and being a listener, really.
So, and then just, it's going to be interesting for people on the call just to know that one of the reasons why the fan elected director group was set up, the network was set up, was to try to tackle some of this kind of like handovers, how we train and develop directors, how we share our skills. So it's very much in my mind to try to encourage people to consider this role. So we've already heard from 2 of the directors on the call that actually they've not stood against anybody and they would welcome that. You know, and so it's like, how do we tackle that? How do we make sure that diversity is at the heart of what we're doing as well, which the guys on the call and in the wider group are very mindful of. So it's just for your information, that's one of the key things that we look at and we sort of talk to across the wider EFL network, you know, your handovers generally for trust stuff, but particularly in this position. So Wickham are an interesting example. I know Tony's not on the call today, but they have 2 fan elected directors. One is always a year behind the other, so that you always have a crossover. So that's been an interesting kind of style of conversation, and something for the whole group to consider recently, as to how that might work, so that you always have that handover period, which I think is prompted thought in all of our minds, hasn't it? Yeah. So in terms of then just looking at some of those skills, why do you think that, Dave, why do you think that people haven't stood against you? Like, what is it about the position? Is it the fact that they don't understand? They're unsure of their own skill set? Why would you say in your situation people haven't stood for the position?
Me?
Dave, Beasley, sorry, yep.
Yeah. I think with our trust, it's a little bit of apathy, to be honest. I think it's probably partly our fault in the fact that we don't educate the fans well enough as to what we do and what the role entails. I think people do think that the FED is just someone who's being nosy, and I think that's something that's thought of on both in the fan base and on the board of directors at times. I think that's it, and also you do need a bit of time on your hands as well. I mean, I'm lucky that I work from home. I know a lot of us do at the moment, but I'm lucky I have a job that I can slot in bits and pieces of football club stuff during my day. I think that's the 2 main things at our place. Yeah.
And the knowledge again. So this is one of the reasons why we decided as a group to put the webinar on, so that we could try to extend out the knowledge based about this role. Mark, is there anything that you can add there? Do you think that there's like a fear of this position, a fear of not being able to do it, or?
Yeah, I think, I mean, for myself, I mean, obviously it's a new role for Crewe Alex anyway, so it's only been 18 months that we've been elected. So I don't think anyone has thought about even running up against me yet, but I'm sure there will be people who want to get involved more in the future. One thing I would say is that I mean, well, I'm sure we'll talk about challenges shortly, but I know that the club themselves love the idea of continuity. They love the idea that someone will be on the board for 2, 3, maybe even 10 years. I don't know. So they're scared of a turnover of directors, FEDs. They would much rather see someone being there for a minimum term of, let's say, 5 years. So whether that happens or not, I don't know, but I think that's one of their concerns. As long as I'm willing to do it, I guess, you know, that not saying that the club would be happy, but I think my organisation would be fairly happy. But it's but I don't know whether that's healthy for the supporters themselves. So it's getting that balance about continuity with the football club, but also giving the supporters some new lease of life, and it doesn't seem to be just a closed shop.
Yeah, there is an important element of consistency and new ideas, right? So, you know, and like taking people out of position in order to just refresh, or, you know, because actually can be a lot of burnout in these positions as well, you know, because you're often doing a lot of different things and you're caught in a crossfire, as we've sort of touched on. But Nick and let's just go to Nick and then Dave, Matthew Jones. What is there anything else that you think that the reason why you know, about knowledge about this position, or from your point of view, being a Fed?
I think, I mean, it's been mentioned a couple of times already. The single biggest issue is time, and you know, I'm in a lucky position to be able to give time. Although I'm actively trying to reduce the amount of time I spend at the club and doing things to make it more attractive to other people. I think the other thing, and I'm almost hesitant to say this, but since we're all friends, I will. Often the FED and the fan elected network is a fantastic opportunity to unburden yourself. So thanks to the FSA for setting that up. But often the Fed becomes a target for the supporters, for the disgruntled, and for the slightly disillusioned, where you have a club board of people who maybe don't live in Exeter, in our case, and who are slightly distant and got a kind of passport photo on the club website, but that's about it. And then there's people like myself and Elaine and Clive and Pete, who are also fan elected directors, who we stand in Red Square on Saturday afternoon, and people have our email addresses and our telephone numbers. And they do use them to express their views. So that can become really, really tough sometimes, because you feel like you're being blamed. Why haven't we signed any strikers this year? Actually, it's not my job. That the manager does that. But you're the one that gets targeted. Nobody's going to give Matt Taylor a hard time. It's you that get it. So I think there are a lot of people, and certainly people have said to me, one of the kind of more reasonable supporters will come up and say, couldn't do what you do, Nick. For that reason, that people are always very keen to criticise. So along with the patience, you've got to have a hard skin.
Yeah. And Dave, Matthew Jones, any additions to what the...
I think I've been stood against for free for the last 3 years, so I'm not worried about that. I do think that there is a lot about continuity, and there's a lot of experience that you gain over a period of time. I think the negatives are, and although I think I've been fairly lucky, is that I could see social media being a real negative for support FEDs, and people expect you to be there 24 hours, 7 days a week. They don't think you're going to be on holiday. They don't think you're going to have things to do with your families on a Sunday. If they want to ring you or contact you, they're going to do it. For example, last week I went away with my daughter to see my daughters for 3 days, and I probably spent 8 or 9 hours of those 3 days on phone calls, which were important phone calls, but it's a very difficult thing to say, no, I don't want to be involved in this call, because sometimes, like last week, it was about personal issues. So no, it's time really, and the social media and the battle between, like I think said earlier, is between you know more than they do, but sometimes you can't tell them, and you know things are happening but you can't tell them, and you'd love to tell them everything but you can't.
So, I mean, this is one of the reasons, again, why this mini network was set up, because it is an incredibly difficult position, and can be a really difficult position. So, you know, I think this isn't for everybody, necessarily, is it? You know, not anybody could be a supporter director. You have to kind of have a certain way about you potentially. So just let's look at the challenges. We're going to hopefully finish on a bit of a high, everybody. So, you know, we'll just look at the challenges first, and then there are some positives and benefits that we wanted to kind of get across as well. But in terms of the challenges, so some of them, that feeling of being caught in the crossfire between supporters and the club, that's incredibly difficult, isn't it, Nick? It's, you know, you are the targets sometimes. So sorry.
No, I mean, as again, somebody's already mentioned, you know, as a director, you do have duties that you have to perform, and you have to perform them in a certain way. I've worked in IT all of my career, but since I've been at the football club for 4 years, and I've never seen so many NDAs in all my life. You know, non-disclosure documents and terms and contracts that prevent you from talking to the fans about the very thing that they want to know. And it's usually about how much players are being paid, or, you know, our directors being paid. So there's a real sense that you've got to. We have this saying: the members have to feel like they own their football club. And that really doesn't work when you're not telling them stuff. So you've somehow got to find a channel of communication that allows you to say in a way that's believable, don't worry, everything is okay. But it is incredibly hard. You do accept it as part of the role, to be honest. I don't think it will ever change, and it's far better this way. The supporters do have somebody to go and ask, and I guess with so many clubs there isn't that option. So as long as you can provide people with answers, even if you're telling somebody, I'm sorry, I can't tell you that because, then that's better than just ignoring the question altogether. And so I make sure I answer all the emails that I get, all the letters and stuff, just to say, I understand how you're feeling. Sorry, I can't tell you precisely what you need to know. What I can tell you is that the club are doing everything possible to make a situation right. But that's where the patience comes in, I think.
I think it's really important as well in terms of a filler communication. So even if you can't say anything, that bit of communication does actually make a massive difference to people, just generally speaking, but also particularly in this position, because, you know, there are certain things, barriers that you're coming up against as well. So just feeling heard, I think, is really important for people. But that's equally the same for you all. And any other challenges? So the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, David Matthew Jones, that's exhausting in some senses, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It is, because like for me, on top of the FED role, I've got the SLO role. I'm looking after the volunteers at the club. That's part of my role as well. So it's trying to find volunteers as well to help you all the time. And that's not a simple thing nowadays. I think it's getting harder to find people who will help you. There are a core group of people who will do anything, but trying to get younger people involved, I think that's getting a lot harder now.
What do you think that we could do as a group to encourage more people to consider, like, obviously there would have to be more clubs that have this position, and we are starting to see some in the Premier League, some other clubs kind of maybe adopting an associate director or a full director. What do we think that we could do to sort of prepare people potentially for an increase in this position? Because again, one of the reasons why the group was set up is because I felt that there might naturally be an increase in this position. So what is there anything that we can do as a network, do you think, to encourage, prepare? This is one of the things, but is there any other suggestions from the table?
I think you can. I mean, everything that we've spent half an hour saying telling everybody how horrible it is being a director of a club. But there's some really good stuff as well, because there are people who thank you for what you're doing and are appreciative of it. I've always found that there's at least one other director on the club board, a non-fan elected director, who gets it. There's at least one, and we've probably got more than that now at Exeter because we've been so persistent, but there's always somebody who gets it. And if you can strike some kind of relationship with that person who may be really, really commercial from a big corporate background, if they're a fan of the club as well, they will get it and they will help you and hold your hand. And I've certainly been very fortunate to have had several people like that in my time at the club, who've been willing to listen to me as much as I've listened to others, and have tried to understand what we're trying to achieve, which is a sound ethos that doesn't, you run a football club for the supporters. Nobody ever really owns a football club. You run it for the supporters. And once people start to get that, then life becomes a lot easier. And there are some fantastic things. I've got in my lounge, I've got a photograph of me with the team photo at the beginning of the season. I live for that day. To line up with the team and have your photograph taken, and it's in the boardroom, it's around the club. That's my stamp on immortality.
And we will definitely come on to this, the benefits, because we're not trying to sit here. What we're trying to do is a dose of healthy reality, I would say, as to how difficult the position can be, alongside the multiple benefits and the importance of the role. Because we as a group have talked about that a lot, haven't we, in the kind of Fed meetings, about how important this role is. So just touching on that in terms of solutions then, because we've recognised some of the challenges, and it's good that people go into a position like this or learn about a position like this with their eyes wide open, right? That's sort of what we're trying to say. So, let's just cover a few of the potential solutions that could happen to help alleviate some of the challenges. So, for example, the accessibility side of things. So, couple of you have said, well, my email and my phone number is accessible to people, so I get called all the time. So should it be that more directors are more accessible, it's more transparent? How would that look? Is there other rules that could be put in place to help this position? So, for example, should it be director, fan elected, rather than fan elected director? Because we know that sometimes people discount you for being a fan elected director. Is there so if you have a particular challenge, we'll do it this way. If you have a challenge, have you got a solution that might help that? So I'm going to go to Mark first. Taking on it.
Yeah, I think before I discuss that, just looking at the issues that I've had in the past, I feel as though that I'm probably sort of leading a bit of a path because I'm the first one that we've had. But it's taken me 18 months just to sort of get a feel for the job, and to understand what's going on. I've had so many run-ins with the individual directors. I don't think there's anyone on the board I've not had a run-in with. I think Nick mentioned, we've all mentioned about patience. You sometimes just got to bite your tongue and just sort of take a back step and then think about it again tomorrow. But all our directors are shareholders. No one owns more than 10%, and we're all supporters of the football club. And they all get it. Everyone gets it, but they're not from the same background that the majority of the supporters are. So they get it, but they wouldn't know how much a pint of beer was. They wouldn't know how much a shirt costs. And if they did, they would think nothing of it. It's not relevant to them at all. They just see what the bottom line is. So trying to get that across to them on my own is impossible. So the only way I've been able to do it is just involve the rest of the fans, and get meetings together with the board and introduce them to the real life supporters, if you like, the everyday fan who comes down, who does spend his hard-earned money on anything he can for the Alex. So introducing a third shirt or a fourth shirt, they will buy that shirt. So it's trying to get them to recognise that we just can't keep taking money from the same pot, because they do get it, but they've never had to worry about find money. It's never been a problem to them. So, and I think if they understand where we're coming from and they can see it, then that's part of that solution. In terms of the actual help, I mean, I don't get many personal emails. So all my RSS committee, I mean, it virtually all gets directed to them. I mean, I get occasional ones, but it's not massive. So for me as a director, for me to be able to do what I do as a director of the Alex, I need my support network behind me. So I'd love to know how I can grow that support network. It's trying to get people involved. And with COVID, and obviously it's been difficult, but that's my next challenge. Is I want to try and get more of our fans involved. I want to get certain subcommittees sorted out. I want LGBT, I want diversity, I want women. I mean, that's a big thing. It's the football club at the moment. It's trying to make the environment a more pleasant place to be, and stop people being so anxious, or particularly women being anxious about coming on their own or bringing the children. So I can't do that. Neither, I don't think the football club can really do it. So we need help. And as I say, I wouldn't be able to do what I do without the support of my RSS board. So I'm just trying to increase that engagement with our other members if they are willing to help out.
I think just before we move on to the others, the point around the directors and there being a disconnect. So it's you, them kind of. I think this might be an important point, and we've talked about it as a group, but the education on both sides, because often it's, we'll educate the supporters need to know, but actually the clubs also need education on this position. They also need to understand what the position's for. So I think like one of my solutions would be that cross education both ways, club side as well, club workshops. But yeah, really interesting points, Mark. Dave Matthew Jones. So a particular challenge that you face, and then a solution maybe. Is it a rule? Is it training? More support?
I think the biggest one is support, really. I think also people when you talk about the club being educated in the roles, I think that would be superb, because I think there is a misconception. And for example, one club mentioned to one of the directors recently that they didn't want fan elected directors because all they're interested in is players' wages, who's being transferred, and it's not what you're about. Most of our board meetings are centred around the playing, the accounts, safeguarding, health and safety, diversity. Then you'll talk about some of the fans' issues. They're the things that are the main core things of the health and safety, the safeguarding, the playing side, and the accounts that are always going to be done. I do think that probably there is training and probably shadowing. Allow somebody to shadow you, because I don't think they have any conception of what. Most people don't have any conception of what is involved, and maybe I just take on more and more, and I shouldn't do it. But I think you represent all supporters. So when you're arguing or discussing something with the board, you have to represent not only the trust members, but you also have to represent every supporter within the ground the best way you can. And you've got to follow social media to a point, and the message boards and everything like that, so you can pick up the what the views are of people. And on match days, I'm walking around all the time around the ground before the game, and people can come up and talk to me because I want to know what their views are. I have opinions, but my opinions are only my opinions. And I think one of the things that I've done, which was to set up a fans parliament, so they can come to me, and now we can go to the board together and say, this needs looking at, or these are the views of the fans. It's not just me saying it any longer, it's a group of other people as well. So I think that's important, to get as many people on your side as you can when you're trying to put a point across.
I think as well, on the point of kind of shadowing, or is a really important solution, because the take, and I think this is generally speaking, towards adult learning is really harsh. It's like, well, if you don't know, then you don't know. So, you're wiped off the face of the earth almost. And it's a very harsh kind of reality. And like, ideally, you would have a more kind of productive way of environment for people to learn, because actually, realistically, in this position, you are learning all the time. And even once you've done it for a few years, I think you always have scope to check and challenge and reflect and learn still. This is a really important point, and that was sort of one of the reasons as well why we wanted to kind of to do this webinar, and also to meet as a group, because ideally we would have two cohorts. We would have a cohort of current feds, and then we would have a training cohort that were then looking for positions or trying to influence positions at creation or taking over of a position, current one. So I definitely think that shadowing kind of mentoring route is and could be really valuable. It's been shown to be very valuable across football coaching or other kind of environments. So why not in this environment? And it's okay not to know things. I remember somebody saying that to me once, and I think that's it could be an incredibly useful motto across this. But the environment is so harsh that then is a struggle. Dave Beasley, what's your main challenge and then a potential solution?
Fortunately, everything I was going to talk about is kind of gone. I think Mark made the very same point I would have done, is that I found my first 18 months, I kept hitting the same sentence coming back at me. That's not how football works. And I think that's the most vital thing. I think not preparing somebody for the role, but giving them a kind of, like you say, a mentor, a sounding board. Am I saying the right things? Am I asking the right questions? Am I doing the right things? But also maybe a little bit of basic training, like David's touched upon, on the core principles, being able to interpret a set of accounts, understanding the basics of safeguarding and stadium safety, and what you can and can't talk about in the public domain as well. But I think, I would have definitely, I went into it blind. We didn't really have, our relationship with the Robbins Trust's relationship with the FSA was quite quiet when we first started out, or when I first started out. I think if I'd have had a Nick Hawker or a David Matthew Jones to fall back to, it would have been a lot more helpful. I think we've probably found here that we've got the basis of a mentorship group starting, haven't we, in the FED's group? Definitely.
And Nick, did I come to you for your challenge and your solution?
Yeah, I probably touched on this right at the beginning, and I think Mark kind of touched on it as well. Is it does often feel in the boardroom that there is a them and us still, and I resolved it by I used to start arguments or debates, I should say, shouldn't I? I used to start debates by saying, well, the trust think whatever the trust thought, and I changed my narrative to the owners think. And the rest of the board were a lot more responsive, because a lot of them were used to dealing with majority shareholders and people who had a valid view, whether they were experienced or knew anything about it at all. So that helped a great deal. I very quickly got over the people who were saying, this is football, Nick, it's different. It really isn't. It might be at the training ground, which I refer to as the land of mischief and mayhem, because that's where most of the problems seem to emanate from. And often they're not problems, but that's how it appears. But it is in every other respect. It's quite a complex business, but it is normal. It's a normal, you have to buy things in and sell them at a profit. And so I think football has a knack of, and certainly the thing that I've probably been my biggest challenge is decomplicating things, making them not becoming blinded by it's football, Nick, it's different. And I've, as I said earlier, I've done that by pairing up with a non-Fed who sympathised, who I somehow was able to talk to. And there's always been one of those people. You have to invest in it, but there's always been somebody who's been willing to say, "I hear what you're saying, Nick. Let's see how I can help you." And a challenge I would love to adopt, and I'm just thinking of this now, is I would love the club board to be on a call like this. For our non-execs and that, to just be on this call and hear what people are saying, because the role of a Fed is so important for football clubs going forward, so important, and we need to take great care of it.
I love the rephrase as well. The owners, I think that's really smart way of just changing the narrative slightly. So, okay, I'm really conscious of time, and I do want to allow for a few minutes for any questions from the floor, the technological floor. So what I wanted to do was just touch on a few successes. So I said that we were going to get happy. I was actually going to sing to you, and then I've decided that I won't sing any songs about happiness, but we're going to get happy. So talk to me about a success that you're particularly proud of. So it's going to be a little bit quick fire, but we are going to start with Dave Matthew Jones. Oh,
sorry. Where I was saying that last week I had one bad point on the same week. I had 3 good ones. We finally got Picture Path working, which is for SEN children who suffer from anxiety, and ACT working at the football club. So that was really good for me. We're halfway, 90% away from getting a scoreboard that supporters wanted working. And we went for a second visit at the mosque, and that went really well. So, yeah, 3 out of 4. Yep, I'll take that anyway.
Yeah, amazing. Nick?
So a couple of things, only confirmed today, but the ladies' team are going to be allowed to play on the first team pitch in a few weeks' time. That's always a struggle, convincing the groundsman and the manager to allow the ladies to play. The last time we did, it was between thunderstorms where the pitch was a mess anyway. But this time around, we planned it well in advance, and we'll get a great opportunity. The last ladies' game attracted 600 people into the ground, which the trust sponsored. The next one's against Plymouth Argyle, so I'm pretty hopeful that we'll get more than 600. So that's a real big plus. Getting the club to just acknowledge the ladies' team, the women's team, I beg your pardon, as being an important part of the family is just a big step forward. Just about to sign off on a governance manual, which we've integrated into our articles, and that's very supporter-led. It allows for the trust to have a majority on the, or to appoint the majority of voting directors onto the club board. That's a big thing. And just the way that we've grown, I think the thing that I'm most pleased about is over the last few years, we've really grown up. People have gotten into their roles. Somebody talks about continuity. We've had the same Feds on the club board for at least 3 years, and they've really grown into the roles and are making a contribution to the way the club operates. And I think that's how you win everybody over, that you're actually making a contribution. And there is still the them and us, but it's much less than it was a number of years ago. So I'm really pleased about that.
Love that. And just on the women's game stuff, it always amazes me that football clubs are so resistant to the women's game and to looking after their women's team as well, because there's research to show that people would different people would enter into a dialogue or be interested in brands, and I won't use brands for a football club, but that different organisations that invest in women's sport. So it always amazes me, you know, and as a Preston fan, we have like such heritage around the women's game, but we don't, it sits in our community arm. The women's team doesn't sit in the main club, and it always baffles me. But I think the same could be said for supporters trusts and supporters groups as well, as you would get a different cross section of members if you cater for or work with the local supporters group as well. So I do think like supporters groups could definitely lead by example, which a number of them are doing and often do on a number of different areas as well. But it always just baffles me, this area. I just kind of think, why be so resistant? Rant over. Mark.
Yeah, I agree with you on the women's side. Maybe that's for another day, the discussion about that, something we need to improve. But yeah, I can't really complain. We've had lots of successes. I mean, when we first got elected, and we did a survey right at the beginning of our tenure, and asking our supporters, our fans, what they wanted to see improvements, and they included they wanted a scoreboard, they wanted some new televisions in the concourse, they wanted less queues. And they were all done within months. We've got a scoreboard, we've got a electronic scoreboard, we've got a new bar upstairs, we've got new tellies everywhere, with the main lounges all been redecorated and redone. So I think I was very lucky that I joined at the same time as there was a complete change in ownership. So the new directors were all very keen to make an impression, and they looked to me to try and find out what the fans would want. So I had some very, very quick wins. There's been a few challenges since, and lots of challenges, but honestly, it couldn't really have gone a great deal better. I think it's just trying to communicate with the fans better, which was the reason why I got involved in the end, and that's improved dramatically as well. So better communication, more facilities, better facilities, and the fans are being listened to, which is what it was all about. So. No, I couldn't have expected a great deal more, to be fair.
Awesome. And then Dave Beasley.
Yeah, I think mine's a bit more generalistic than others. I think when I took on the FED role, the relationship between the trust and the club was on the floor. There was a lot of mistrust between them, and I think I've smoothed the waters there. I think I get listened to a lot more now than I did when I first started, although I could always be better. And I think I've given the role a bit more of a long-term validity, because my predecessor stood down after 1 year due to frustrations, both with the club and the trust. In terms of kind of individual projects, it's one of those where ask me again in 6 months, because I think we've just started off a project that could be quite fruitful for the trust and the club.
Okay, and then last thing before we open up to any questions, it's very mysterious there, Dave. So just thinking about, I wanted to say 3 benefits, but I'm just conscious of time. 2 benefits for having a fan elected director and the fan elected director position, how important it is. It's a very leading question, but we'll do a quick fire again. So two benefits for having a fan elected director role. So Mark.
I think the first one is getting both sides to see the different sides of the story. You know, it's very often I've explained to my fans and the supporters what the board are thinking, and vice versa. So I think that's been enormous, because the two don't necessarily always meet up. And the second one, I think, is I actually think the fans have got a lot to give the football club. So some of the suggestions that have been made by the fans have been really welcomed by the board as well. So I think the board has realised that the fans can add a lot of value, not just in turning up, but actually some of the suggestions, and that we do really want. We've all got Crewe Alexandra's interests at heart. So yeah, no.
Amazing. Dave Matthew Jones. Oh.
It's about listening, and it's about informing each other. The fans are being listened to, and hopefully the path is 2 ways, as much as it can be. And I think the other one is I'm particularly keen is to try and make the football club as inclusive as possible for everyone. So I think, that's really important for us. So I would say that's being worked on now. So I think that was a good benefit.
Right. Love it. Nick, so benefits?
I think why wouldn't you want a supporter on the club board? There's somebody who stood on the big bank and drunk the coffee and gone through the turnstiles and bought a dodgy pasty at half time. Why wouldn't you want to know about that stuff and actually be told quite forcibly? That's really important. And I think it's the other benefit is that it's really important that the supporters feel that those questions are being asked at the club board and not just dismissed as, well, we'll do another home shirt this season because they'll buy it regardless, and they've got somebody there to say no. Little kids press mums and dads for Christmas presents that they really can't afford this year, so let's treat them kindly.
Nice. And Dave Beasley?
And that's it. Inclusion for fans and perspective for both sides. Really, it gives the board a perspective that they wouldn't otherwise see, and I think it gives the fans a perspective that they wouldn't otherwise want to see. They just want to see a lot of fans just want to see what they see on the message boards and on the social media. They sometimes some perspective and some hard truths help smooth the waters.
I think I'm just going to throw one in here, but it's also a recognition for the fantastic skill set that supporters hold. Because it's almost like club directors are demigods or kind of like, some other, whereas actually there's so many skilled people in a supporters group and across a supporter base that actually it's recognition of the incredible amount of knowledge that can be that position. So, to just end on that note before we open it up for a few questions, realise we are 1 minute away from 6. So we have 5 minutes extra time, people, 5 minutes from the official scoreboard. But this webinar was partly to educate and to share knowledge and also to celebrate you all and to celebrate our group of fan elected directors. So, it's fantastic, some of the work that you're doing. It's incredible that we've now got this mini support network, and then we've got a wider network that we can go to support for. And, it's just trying to encourage you all to, as best as possible. And hopefully everybody that's on this call would agree to celebrate some of those wins, some of those successes, because I genuinely don't think we do that enough. And that's actually part of it, to educate and share the message around fan elected directors and the importance of the position. So thank you everybody for joining the round table, and thanks for everybody on the floor.